Following the death of Ralph Wilson back in 2014, there were serious doubts as to whether or not the Buffalo Bills would remain in Buffalo. When the Wilson Family Trust took over the team, there were plenty of interested buyers, and according to County Executive Mark Poloncarz, some of those parties were interested in relocating the Bills and moving them to a bigger or better market. Of course, the Bills are one of the smallest markets in the NFL and, in fact, the entire North American sports sphere. They rank near the bottom amongst the likes of New Orleans, Green Bay, Quebec City, Winnipeg, and many, many others, Arizona as well. Some wanted to keep the Bills in Buffalo. Others, though, saw Buffalo as the tiny market that they are, and they were interested in moving the team to a larger market with a potentially larger fan base, like Toronto or Los Angeles. Also, one big caveat during this whole entire scramble to see who would win the Bills auction, the stadium. Ralph Wilson Stadium was in terrible shape, and no big renovation could be applied to it and keep that stadium up and running for a long time. We saw big renovations applied to stadiums like Arrowhead and Soldier Field, which kept those stadiums up to date and pretty modernized. This Bill Stadium, though, could not have that applied to it. It just was too outdated, too old, and in too rough of a shape for the Bills to keep playing there for the next 20 or 30 years. So with buying the Bills came with potentially having to foot the bill and build a new stadium. Now, where would that stadium be? That was up for some debate. And we will see all of those debates when I lay out all of the potential candidates that were seriously in the running to buy the Buffalo Bills back in 2014. Let's look at the first candidate, Terry and Kim Pegula. Local businessman Terry Pegula and his wife Kim were the front runners to buy the Bills back in 2014. They had already invested in the Western New York area, buying the Buffalo Sabres, an NHL franchise, back in 2011 from Tom Golisano, and they also owned the lacrosse franchise named the Buffalo Bandits. Pegulas had amassed their, at the time, $3.3 billion net worth in the fracking and natural gas industries. They had made a commitment as well to keep the Bills in Buffalo, and they were by far the Bills fans' preferred choice of the next ownership group. The second group interested in buying the Buffalo Bills was fronted by rock star Jon Bon Jovi, who is probably the most hated man on this list. He was despised by Bills fans and politicians alike. He was the face of a group of investors based out of Toronto, with his biggest backer being named Larry Tannenbaum, who was at the time the chairman of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. Plus the Rogers family, who owned Rogers Communication and has their name on the big Rogers Tower in downtown Toronto. They were also investing in this deal. There were serious concerns from Buffalonians that if Bon Jovi bought the Bills, he would relocate the team to Toronto, as not only was he being backed by a bunch of Toronto businessmen and women, he was also a native Mississaugan, and his investing group would have preferred to move the stadium to Toronto to potentially open up a larger market. He would have brought serious mainstream attention, though, back to the Buffalo Bills, who, as we all know at the time, were in the middle of a lengthy playoff drought, relatively forgotten, and pretty irrelevant on the national stage. But that didn't stop fans from fearing the worst. Attention would not have soothed their fears. Now, he is, as I mentioned, pretty hated in Buffalo, and back in an interview in 2020, he would go on to say that he would never step foot again in Buffalo, New York. And that has most certainly been the case, as he has not been to Buffalo, Darien Lake, or the greater Western New York area since 2013. Now, the third potential candidate on this list is future President Donald Trump. He was arguably the most intriguing candidate, as we don't really know what Trump exactly wanted to do with the Buffalo Bills. Publicly, he would say that he was very committed to keeping the Bills in Buffalo. He said, quote, "I would love to do it, and if I can, I'm keeping the Bills in Buffalo," he said in an interview to a local journalist. Trump, of course, made his fortune in the real estate and entertainment industries, fronting and starring in the show The Apprentice. And at the time of potential interest, Trump had a net worth of $3.9 billion. He would bring plenty of attention like Bon Jovi back to the Bills, but given his polarization even back in 2014, plus his failed attempt to compete with the NFL back in the 1980s, made his bid kind of a long shot, although to outsiders that didn't stop them from viewing him as a big-time frontrunner along with the Pegulas. Now, the fourth candidate on this list, his name is Steve Ballmer. He was the former Microsoft CEO, and at the time, he was looking to maybe bring an NFL franchise to the big city of Los Angeles. That is because Ballmer had recently just invested and bought an NBA franchise, namely the LA Clippers. He kept them in Los Angeles, and now he was looking to expand his LA entertainment sector by bringing the Bills to Buffalo. Now, his bid never really got off the ground. This was only rumored. This was never seriously concrete, as was the bids from Bon Jovi, Trump, and the Pegulas. Finally, the fifth and final potential candidate that was mentioned in plenty of articles back in the day was former Sabres owner and politician and businessman Tom Golisano. He was rumored to be interested in buying the Bills, and of course, like the Pegulas, he was firmly committed to keeping the Bills in Buffalo. That was his number one pledge. That was basically his campaign slogan, that he would keep the Bills in Buffalo. He had already saved the Sabres from potential relocation or demise back in 2001, and he was thinking that maybe he could do the same thing with the Bills. He kind of was serious about his bid, but he didn't really exactly go too far. His bid was a long shot, as his net worth at the time was only $1.9 billion, significantly lower than the net worth of the Pegulas, Trump, or the Bon Jovi investing consortium. Now, of course, in 2023, almost 10 years after all of this has gone down, the Bills were, of course, bought by Terry Kim Pegula. We know that. We also know how they, after some turbulence early in their reign, eventually led the Bills to significant playoff success, led them back to relevancy, and helped them get a new stadium in Buffalo. This would not only keep the Bills in Buffalo for the considerable future, it would also strengthen their ties to the community, as they will be building a new stadium just across from the current one in Orchard Park, which is supposed to be ready by 2026. We shall see about that. But with that new stadium also comes a 30-year lease. This was a troubling time for Bills fans and politicians, and for the community altogether, as their favorite football team, the Buffalo Bills, were facing a potential threat of relocation. Now, in another time, in another city with a different group of characters, maybe the Bills would have been relocated. But by the good graces, the Bills were not only to stay in Buffalo, they're also able to solve their longtime troubles of finding and building a new stadium. And the Bills are owned by people that actually like the city, that are proud to be Buffalonians. That is the best case scenario for everyone involved. Thanks for watching. See all of you in the next video.